Hello, welcome, friends. It's Cindy Silva on the Metaphysical Wisdom Podcast. I'm here with Michael Frederick. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy, for allowing me to be here. And at a spur of the moment, I mean, we really got it together quickly.
Yeah, the timing is great. I was introduced to you by Michael Gelb, who's coming to Avila Beach to teach a Super Chi weekend. And I was mentioning to him that I'm really interested in the Alexander technique as well as Feldenkrais. And he mentioned you being one of his very dear friends. You've studied together since, I think he said, what year was it? It was
74. We've known each other since 73 or 74.
Yeah, and you studied together in London, and
Oh, yeah, it was back in the early days.
Wow.
And what we call the salad days, those golden moments in one's youth. And here we were living in London, England for almost a decade.
Oh my gosh, wow. And now you're in California?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm in Ojai, California, which is a small valley north of LA, about an hour and a half drive, just inland, about 20 minutes from Ventura, and just south of Santa Barbara.
Yeah, great. And I'm in Avila Beach, is north 90 minutes of Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And you're going to be offering a Feldenkrais weekend retreat, the last.
Yeah, it's actually what it is an Alexander technique retreat, but because I wear many hats, and one of them is as a Feldenkrais practitioner, besides yoga teacher, I include everything. I mean, you only teach what you know and what you see. So I try to teach my background, as it were.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about your retreat at the end and invite people who might be interested to join you. But you've been doing this for 43 years, the retreat itself.
Yeah, 43 years. It started out in Ojai and moved around California a bit, but now we're in Malibu at the beautiful Sarah Retreat Center. It's a Franciscan retreat center overlooking the Blue Pacific, and it's just a wonderful place.
Oh, it sounds
This
beautiful.
makes the 43 years. I mean, you talk about Michael Gelb. I mean, back in 1979, my wife and I moved to Ojai to put our children in school, and here, actually a Krishnamurti school, the Oak Grove School, and you made a lot of friends living in England all those years ago, and I was missing them, so I invited them over for a workshop. I said, I can't afford to pay you anything, but I will definitely cover your airplane fare and your living expenses, and we'll have a great time. And that happened here in Ojai. Everyone showed up that I invited. That was 1979, and we've kept it going every year since.
Well, I'm so glad that you have enough interest to support it. And
well, I mean, to me, the only game in town is learning how to work on yourself, I figure. And the Alexander technique fits in to that perfectly.
Yeah. All right. Well, for people who aren't aware of the Alexander technique, can you give us a summary, quick an introduction of what that is?
Sure, easily. There was a man named F.M. Alexander. He was from Tasmania, but then he moved to Australia, right next door, and he was a young actor. And around 24 years old, he was getting quite successful, but he started losing his voice. And through a process of self-study and exploration, he eventually solved his vocal problem, and he went back to acting. But other actors would hear about that and ask him for help, and then he'd figure, well, maybe I have to figure out how to teach this work. And what he developed later became known as the Alexander technique, but he actually called it psychophysical re-education, mind-body learning. And we're talking around 1894 to 1900 was when he was developing it all. So he was one of the first people from the West, actually, to think in terms of mind-body. What the essence of the technique is learning how to observe when the fight, flight, freeze response becomes fixed, and then learning how to release out of it, you see. And the fight or flight response is a very healthy response mechanism. It's a life-saving process that we have ingrained in us through thousands of years. The problem is that with our cerebral cortex, we tend to interfere with it. And then that causes things in the performing art world, they call it stage fright. So what happened with F.M. Alexander, just to keep it simple, a young actor who was getting successful, he got a little stage fright, a little fear that caused him to contract, to pull his head back, created downward pressure in his body, put pressure on his breathing and vocal mechanism, and he lost his voice. Now, he didn't know any of what I just told you. He had to really observe that over a period of time and put it all together. But he also learned that if you try to change things from the interfering pattern, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
You're just increasing the very problem. So he learned that the first thing he had to do is subtract the interference, the locked-in fight or flight response. And he did that by learning how to think kinesthetically, think with his body, learning how to delicately move out of that downward pattern of holding into an upward release. The moment he did that, his voice freed up, his everything came back, and it became later known as the Alexander technique, and it's taught at all the major performing arts schools in the world: Juilliard School in New York City, Royal College of Drama, and Royal College of Movement of Music in London, and so on.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. It reminds me of the quote by Einstein about you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it.
That is exactly correct.
You can't resolve a pattern from within the pattern that created it.
That's exactly correct. And what's interesting about Alexander is he didn't, living in Australia in the 1880s and 90s, he didn't have access to yoga teachers or a Shaolin monastery in China or any type of Zen training or anything. He figured it out on his own, which was highly unusual. He was actually a genius to be able to do that. And so I call it Western Zen. Even though he didn't have a foundation in any type of Buddhist or Zen training, it is very akin to that. It's all process oriented and so on.
Yeah, and there's a presence about it, right? You have to be completely present with your experience,
right?
To kind of witness the organic intelligence of the body unwinding itself, but make space for that and observe it, and then kind of put that together in terms of a process. But
yeah,
it's
you're
the
correct.
body is revealing it, right? And then
you learn how to observe without being critical. So often we get critical of ourselves. I don't like this, I like that sort of reactional pattern. And he saw that didn't work. What you had to do is simply watch without judgment and then learn how to delicately move or release out of the pattern. Now, this isn't terribly esoteric. If you go up to any person you might meet on the street and you say, "Are you tense?" Most people will be honest and say, "Yeah, I'm a little tense." And if you ask them to relax, what they do is they let go. They go, "Oh." They let go, but they let go and gravity takes over and they actually collapse into their body. So what we want to learn is what I call smart relaxation, which is learning how to observe that we're holding on in some way, but we want to learn how to let go, and we let go into a pattern that is inherent in all vertebrate animals. The head does lead and the body follows, whether you're a four-legged dog or cat, or whether a human being on 2 feet. You get this dynamic. And so basically you're subtracting the interference to allow nature to come back into play so that upward energy thrust happens. Am I making sense to you at all with that?
Yeah. Except recently, I've been noticing how much energy is up in my head and forward. I've been trying to bring it back into the central channel and down.
Right.
It's because of so much. It seems disproportionate, based on all the screens and energy that we have coming out of our eyes, and how do we maintain energy inside the body?
Oh, this is really critical today. You see, especially with young people. I mean, I have a daughter who's 19, She has a couple computers and an iPad and a smartphone. I mean, she's like wired up to the whole digital world, and it's all boom. And I'm wanting her to learn how it's useful to use, but don't be mesmerized by it. Don't be let the tail wag the dog, as it were. Don't let the technology control you.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and it's really important because that affects people's posture. It affects how they move, their coordination, and so on.
Yeah. We were mentioning this book just before we hit the record button, and
Right.
it's a classic. And I was talking about how impressed I was with the very first sentence and even the preface of the book. And can I read it? It's for
Sure,
the audience.
please.
And it says, "We act in accordance with our self-image, the self-image, which in turn governs our every act, is conditioned in varying degrees by three factors: heritage, education, and self-education." I
Right.
wonder if you could help us understand the difference in those three.
Right. So there was self-education. I couldn't quite hear. What was the other?
Heritage, education, and self-education.
Okay. So, well, the difference is that heritage are what we inherit through our family. Um, there's patterns, you see. I have a daughter who's about 43. She's a clinical psychologist. And I was over there for lunch earlier today. And we were talking, and she's going through a divorce, and it's sort of a hard time. But I was watching, and I was thinking, my God, she's approaching this a bit like her mom, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And my first wife's sadly no longer living, but there she was, manifesting through my older daughter, the pattern. Now, I'm not criticizing my daughter. Her name's Rowan, and but I can say that about me too.
Sure.
If I get flustered some way, I say, "Oh, there's my mom." If I get a little pushy, I'll say, "Hey, there's my dad." You see, my dad was a product of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He was a can-do type of guy. Both of them had gone through the Great Depression. Both of them had college degrees before the war started. And then World War II happened. So my dad was, and he survived it quite well. But the thing was, is that he was the type of guy, if there was a problem, boom, we're going to tackle it right now. And he was principal of 3 elementary schools simultaneously. And because the baby boom generation hit. But anyway, the long and the short is that we have patterns from our family. And one wants to be able to work with that without being critical of our family. We're all dealing with the same thing, just different angles on it.
We're a continuation of that, but yeah.
And then the educational system, I already talked about that, is a bit top heavy. I knew a man who died about 2 years ago, Sir Ken Robinson.
No,
He has a #1 TED Talk
my
in the
favorite.
whole world.
Oh, it's so good and funny.
He's so good. And his son lives in LA and studies with me every week, James Robinson. But the long and the short is that what Sir Ken Robinson was knighted for was his understanding that the educational system is out of balance, that it is top loaded, and then it maybe spills over a little bit down through other parts of ourselves. And you could say that we have intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and physical intelligence. And what we want to do is balance all three. And that's where self-education comes in, you see, because you learn how to observe the first thing we talked about, how we've learned things from our parents, genetically and also just learned. And then you learn how to deal with that so that you don't, in some way, stir up the mix in a way you don't want to. You have to be really accepting of yourself and of your parents, with all their faults or with all our faults. Then the thing about education, that's the world we grew up in. I mean, whether I talk to people in Europe or here in America, it's the same. This. So I say, okay, I had a sort of classic elementary, high school, university training, and it could have been better, but it's what it was. So what I've learned to do is simply accept it. I said, okay, there was some really good stuff that has helped me my whole life, and then there's stuff I learned that I let go of that wasn't useful or beneficial. But then the self-study, that's really the key element. Because when you learn to work with yourself, then that you really make it your own. That's it's not coming from outside in, it's coming from inside out. So it's different. And the book you held up by Moshe Feldenkrais, Awareness Through Movement, is a classic book. Came out probably, I'm guessing, in the late 60s or 70s. And I knew Feldenkrais. I trained with him here in America and also in Israel, and became a Feldenkrais practitioner. And it's a very it's a fantastic system of learning and learning about movement. But it's also, you learn about movement, you learn about thinking, and you learn about your emotional world. I mean, it all comes together.
Yeah. I was thinking this morning, in anticipation of our conversation, I don't know, it came to me intuitively, like that the Alexander technique is for working with performers. And I was thinking, like, I don't consider myself a performer. I'm not an actor. I'm not a singer. I mean, I love to dance, but I'm not a professional dancer. But I am always performing, because I'm, performing if I'm hosting a conversation like this, or if I'm teaching one of my classes, or doing a session with a client. There's a performance happening, right? Even if I'm not.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, performance is like cooking in the kitchen.
Right. Even
I mean, the thing about the Alexander work, it maybe was born out of the acting world, but everyone uses it. I mean, the wildest example is probably the Israeli Air Force. The fighter pilots, F-16 jets, studied the Alexander technique. I mean, I'm not fresh on the dates but it did occur. So you can apply it, I mean, at office work, at a computer, or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my students in LA is a real surfer. I mean, a real Malibu surfer. I mean, this guy is so skilled on a big board, he can take a folding chair and unfold it and put it on the board and sit on it and ride the wave. That's how skilled he is. There's videos of that. But the thing, he loves the technique. And if you ask him, his name's Kenny. If you say, Kenny, what happens if you're on the surfboard and you retract your head back and down? He said, you fall off the board because you're interfering with your balance and coordination. Well, that's one of the key principles in the work that I teach, is that you want to not interfere with the natural coordination of your head, neck, and torso in movement. But the Feldenkrais work is phenomenal work, and both F.M. Alexander and Moshe Feldenkrais called their work psychophysical re-education.
And Feldenkrais, was he a student of Alexander?
Well, there's people who'll debate this all left and right. I know all the political stuff behind it. What happened is that Feldenkrais had, I believe, hurt his knee in judo. He was the first non-Asian black belt in judo in Europe. And anyway, he hurt his knee, and he went to F.M. Alexander and had some lessons with, I guess, one or two with F.M. Alexander, and then a handful with Walter Carrington, who trained me in London. And then, and then he progressed further. I mean, he did his, I don't know how to put it, I liked him a lot. A lot of times when people are eclectic, they take something from here and something from there and over here, it ends up being mud, like taking colors and mixing them together, and it gets sort of not a pure color. But Feldenkrais was one of the rare individuals that had studied martial arts, he had studied the Alexander work, he had studied lots of other disciplines, and he was able to put it together with a original stamp of his perspective. And so I thoroughly enjoyed working with him, and he was quite a, I don't know how to put it, a little bit bombastic, a little bit, hey, but he really humbled me when I watched him work with people who had real problems, car accidents, children who had neuromuscular issues. He just had a magic about him that was just a cut above. And to me, I sort of say that the Feldenkrais work is a learning method with more of a therapeutic slant to it. And the Alexander technique is a learning method that you apply to anything you do. Now, I would get Feldenkrais people arguing it a certain way, and Alexander people, I don't go there. So
it's yeah.
But they complement each other wonderfully. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it.
And yeah, there's a lot of similarities, obviously.
Sure are. So.
And I feel there's similarities in the with Qigong, in that it's about, relaxing unnecessary effort and relaxing interference to the natural flow of energy. We're talking energy in Qigong, and you're talking more mechanics, right? With the
right. But in the Alexander technique, when you give yourself a sense of direction or orders to let go of the downward tightening, you're really redirecting energy. I mean, one of the quotes in F.M. Alexander, one of his books called Use of Self, he said, "When I give myself my orders or directions, what I'm actually doing is directing energy to the part of my body required for the movement to occur."
Can you say that one more time?
Sure.
Yeah.
F.M. Alexander, a footnote, "When I give myself my orders or directions, and what they are I wish for my neck to be free, to allow my whole head to release forward and up from my shoulders, my whole body follows, lengthening to widen, and my knees release away." These are directions of subtraction. Neck to be free means I'm stopping the interference that's keeping my neck from being free. My whole head releasing forward and up means I'm stopping or letting go of the pattern of my head being retracted back and down. My whole body following my head means I'm letting go of the pattern of shortening and narrowing and compressing in myself. So they are directions of subtraction and negation. When you do that, you are fundamentally redirecting energy, because if you think of qi, what you're doing is letting go of the habit patterns that interfere with the qi flow. You see? And then what I've learned is that if I learn how to do that, and at the same time learn how to actually, I don't know how to put it, internally redirect that energy flow, you get a whole, what is called an upthrust of direction in your whole body. It's a whole that happens. And I try to keep everything really level-headed. I'm not very much of someone who goes off on a tangent too far, but it's really true. And if I do this, if I have a cup of tea here, which I do, if I take this cup of tea, first I had to reach my hand out to pick it up. And what I did not do is this. A lot of people, you watch people, they go to reach for the cup of tea, and they do that. You see me? I did that. And then they bring it to me, and I'm sort of bringing my face down to it, and I drink, and then I put it back. So what I'm doing is retracting the head back and down and shortening and narrowing to pick up that cup of tea. But if I come back to redirecting my energy and redirecting my whole head, neck, and body, if I let my neck to be free and head to move up, so I get that direction, and I see the tea and I pick it up, I bring it to me, then I drink it, and then I look and I put it down. I don't have to add that pattern on top of the action. Now, it's not that I'm free from that, because the truth is, with the Alexander work, what you learn is you're always going to lose balance and coordination. But that's not a problem. What you're really learning is the art of recreating balance and coordination and movement.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the skill level to recreate poise and ease of movement, then no matter what life gives you, you can, once you get knocked down, that old thing, you're going to pick yourself up again and come back to a better use of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot to do with, chi flow and internal balance, the integration of your mind, your emotion, and your body.
Mm. Well said. And there's a lot of emphasis on the brain and learning and awareness when we pay attention and have awareness on our movement and sensation. The brain is gathering data and information on everything, so that if there are limitations, it learns how to find ways around it and alternative ways.
Sure, that's correct. When I've worked with people who have a neuromuscular problem or something like that, once they approach it in a different perspective, they can learn how to create more ease of movement within themselves. But I wanted to show you a very simple Feldenkrais thing that we can actually do on the camera here.
Okay.
If I ask you to take your hands like this, so please do that, and you're just going to fold them, don't think. And look how they're laced up. They're laced up a certain way, okay? Now look at them and just unlace them and lace them the other way. So please do what I just did. What does that feel like to you?
Yeah, the first one feels more natural.
Say this to me, I couldn't hear that.
First one felt more natural.
More natural, right. So this feels a little unfamiliar, a little odd possibly. So let's just reverse it. We're going to undo it and go back to the first way. Now, how's that for you?
Natural.
It's like going home again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a preference.
It's a preference. That's a good word. So the thing about it is that from a function viewpoint, there's almost no difference between this and this. But from a feeling viewpoint, there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Now, there's a purpose behind this, because so often we do things that we've learned in a familiar way, and it's a way that nature is set up so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every morning, you see.
Right.
The problem with this is that if you have an interfering pattern in your coordination, a funny little twist or spiral or some type of downward pressure or something, but it feels familiar, the moment then, whenever you do the unfamiliar, it doesn't feel right. But maybe the unfamiliar is actually better for you because you're learning to move out of the familiar pattern of interference.
Yeah.
So F.M. Alexander had a phrase for that. He called it faulty sensory feedback, you see. And there's a similar concept in the Feldenkrais work. I'll show you something really fairly quickly. Just please touch the left side of your face.
Touch the left side of my face?
Yeah, just touch it. Okay, so what you did is you took your right arm and touched the left side of your face. Oh, great. So let's touch the left side of your face another way. And do it a third way. Okay, do it a fourth way. Oh, there you go. Okay, how long would it take to touch the left side of your face through all the permutations of us exploring before you would reach around and do this? You see? This is something I learned in Feldenkrais. I mean, try this. It almost feels like a foreign hand touching your face, you see, someone else's hand, you see. So the thing about it is, in the Feldenkrais work, you're exploring non-habitual movement patterns, and this rewires the brain. You see? I mean, this is such a simple example, but it's so funny because people will do all sorts of things, and then very rarely do you get anyone reaching from behind over. very rarely. But in an awareness through movement class, you will do that. He developed hundreds of awareness through movement exercises. Many times they're done on the floor on a yoga mat, but you can do them in a chair and things like that. But they're a way of waking up your whole options in the way you move. And it's fun. I mean, it was a blast and a half training with him.
Yeah.
So, those are two things that that may have, people may find of interest. But I use this quite a bit because
for the practicality. Yeah, I love that we have these practical examples that you shared to see this, just the habitual nature of us. And it reminds me of work called resonance repatterning. And like we resonate with what's familiar, but what's familiar may not be healthy.
That's correct.
So we have to repattern what we resonate with in order to maybe change an energetic blockage or structural blockage. Because I've used this example before. Like if you've walked around your whole life with a heavy sack on your back, your posture is like this.
Right.
And then even if you're not carrying a sack, you're still walking around like this. Right. It's actually physically uncomfortable to stand up straight, even though it's healthier for you because you're familiar with this.
That's exactly correct. And you may notice this when if you have a grandmother around or an older relative, you'll see that part of the image of aging is one slumps and the head comes forward. And the interesting thing is that the average human head weighs in the area of 10 to 15 pounds. I mean, it varies depending on size and so on. But what's interesting is that if I'm in good balance and carriage and deportment and posture, use all those words, then the head is balanced on top of the spine and it is distributed, the weight in my body is distributed quite the way it's designed to be. But the moment I start to come forward, the experiential weight of your head starts to increase. Mm-hmm. And so with age, what you get is people that are quite forward, and that's when they start to get a cane, because you need that third leg, as it were, the cane, to keep them balanced upright. So that's it. I mean, I found that interesting, the idea that experiential weight changes. You see, so I was trying to think of another example.
What was that term you shared, Feldenkrais said about the patterns that we repeat that aren't healthy for us, but they're familiar, that you had a unique term for that? I'll have to go.
Multisensory feedback.
Multisensory.
That was F.M. Alexander's phrase.
Oh, Alexander.
Not Moshe's, but they would have agreed. They both would have agreed on that. And it's interesting. I know that you've studied a lot of yoga, and I have too. I specifically studied in Chennai, India with TKV Desgachar, who had a mammoth influence on my life.
Right.
And the thing in his book, I actually have it here. It's called The Heart of Yoga. It's a wonderful book by TKV Desgachar. He has all the Yoga Sutras in there with the commentary. And in book 2, Yoga Sutras, around 217, one can look it up, it talks about an important concept that is very applicable to both Alexander technique and the Feldenkrais work. And it is being able to see the ramification of your actions before you do them. This is a big deal.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote in the signature in your email, that Chinese proverb. You want to share that? That's incredible. So provocative. It's like...
Right. I'm sorry, which one was it
Something
something?
about anger, like how does abstain from anger save you years of sorrow? What
Oh
was?
yeah, it's on my, yeah. Um, it's when I send out emails, it's there.
Yeah, your email.
I have to think of it. It's basically the idea is that if you can stop a pattern of
Okay,
anger,
I'll look
you
it up.
save 1,000 years of sorrow, something like that.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
it's so true.
It is. It's so
I
helpful
mean,
to it makes you want to pause every time. Just so,
exactly. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I don't want to be in politics in this, but if you think about the war in Ukraine,
mhm.
if Vladimir Putin had any of this knowledge and had learned how to observe the ramification of his actions and learn what not to do, maybe the war wouldn't have happened.
Mm.
You see, people jump into things and then humanity pays the consequences. So,
All
not to
right,
get too heavy here, but it's a
read.
very important thing.
It says, if you are patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 years of sorrow.
That's correct.
That
Right.
that's I've been thinking about that ever since I read
Right.
that, and just how powerful of a statement that is, and
Well,
how we were
sure.
talking before about removing things that are pulling us down.
That's right.
And
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. I mean, whether I talk Feldenkrais, Alexander, or yoga, you get the same concepts in all three learning methods. In yoga, they're always talking about polishing the lens because it clouds your perception. That is faulty sensory feedback from a yoga viewpoint, you see. Um, Observing the ramification of your actions in yoga, in the Alexander terminology, we use the word conscious inhibition. Inhibition is not, I'm not talking about repression, that's a whole different world. Inhibition, we all have instinctive inhibition. If we hear a dangerous sound, what we do instinctively is we crouch down and we listen. Our senses go on the razor's edge, and then if if the danger gets too close, we either spring into action, fighting or running. That's a positive use of the fight or flight response. There's stillness, and then if you're discovered, boom, either fight or run. Um, that is built within our nervous system. It's built within our pet dog and cat. If you ever take a cat and put it outside the door, the first thing it does, it stops and its tail swishes a bit and it's tuning in.
yeah,
My dog would be sleeping here, and if he hears a sound that's unfamiliar, vroom, he's right there. Well, that's all good and fine, but we have something called the cerebral cortex. We have an ability to up the program, as it were. Conscious inhibition is you seeing the ramification of your actions. So if someone says something to you you don't like, and you have, excuse me for swearing, the oh shit reaction, oh shit, that's upsetting to me. And you will contract at that moment. If you see the pattern, you change it by changing your body into a better upward release. You free your neck and you come back.
mm-hmm.
You don't just lash out, you see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know this real well. I mean, you as an astrologer, I don't know much about astrology, but I was born in November 1944, and I'm a triple Scorpio. Yeah, everyone laughs when I say that. But the thing about it is that I had a major temper when I grew up.
That's
You
why you
see.
have that quote on your
I
signature.
think I do. It's something I'm to myself or my young self. But it's changed a lot in my life. I just turned 78, which is a shock to me as it is, because I was always the youngest guy in the room. It's no longer the case. But the thing about it is I've learned to observe my pattern.
Mhm.
Maybe I inherited it from my father. My father in World War II was a commander of a minesweeper with a 40-man crew. He knew how to tell people what to do because of danger. Um, I might have inherited some of his pushiness. But the long and the short is that for some reason in my life, I've had some extraordinary teachers,
Mhm.
and I have learned how I don't have to go there anymore. Or if I do go there, I can come back to a bit of length. I can temper my response. And instead of getting, because if you don't have a tempered response, you just get the opposite reaction. You see, so applying this work to my own life has changed me radically.
Mhm.
Um, you know, anyway, I won't.
I'm curious to ask you first, maybe this is just me and living in my own bubble and my own algorithm, but I seem to find that there's more and more interest in this Alexander technique and Feldenkrais. For some reason, I believe it has to do with the times we're in and the increased amount of fight or flight response. And
Look,
the remedy is in these techniques to learn how to pause and adjust
right,
before we react.
right.
So I wonder, I feel like there's a lot of application to this in
Oh,
working with the children.
yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, in one respect, this work, Feldenkrais work, method, and the Alexander technique should be taught in elementary schools.
Mhm.
It's not. But you know, it's easily you can easily make games of the work. You can easily teach younger kids, um, you know, the principles behind it. Come back to process. Don't push for the end result. You see, you know, all sorts of things. You want the end result to unfold out of moment to moment, present moment process. Um, I had a thought and it left me, but maybe I'll boomerang back.
I mean, children are naturally experimenting with movement, getting down on the ground and moving
Right.
and rolling and pretending to be an animal, whatever.
Sure.
There's all kinds of novelty and diversity in their movement. And then we get, as we get older and serious and focused on a profession or something,
Oh
sitting in
yeah.
a cubicle, like for me, many years I spent on a computer and my head and neck were
Right.
forward.
Right.
And I'm still trying to get the computer out of my body because of
Sure.
that pattern,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like there's something about returning to that kind of there's structure to it because there's definite wisdom and intelligence in it, but it's kind of a structured, unstructured movement where you allow spontaneity, right? You allow
Correct.
diversity because everyone's unwinding in a unique way based on their pattern, right? Or
No, no, all this is correct. I mean, we're living in extraordinary times. I mean, you talked a little bit earlier about the stress that's out there. You know, I mean, you turn on the news, it almost wipes you out every night to hear the news, you see. And the thing is that I grew up at a time without computers, and to me, a smartphone was a phone on the wall with a long cord you could take into the bedroom next door and shut the door. So the idea of having a smartphone is something uh, that is fairly recent. You know, the last 30 years. I didn't even know whenever the iPhone came out. But the thing about it is that we all have now in our pocket a computer. I have, you know, my phone right here. You see, and someone once told me that the
like an
computer.
appendage now.
Pardon me?
It's like an appendage.
Oh, yeah. And they said, you know, someone made a comment, and I'm guessing it's true, that the computer in this phone is more advanced than the computer in the first moon mission, in the spacecraft that took the first astronauts to the moon.
No question.
Yeah. So the point about it is that we're wired to the whole universe. And what happens is that with this phone, that negative news hits us many, many times during the day. If there's a shooting, it's all over the news. It's all over your phone, all of this. And our nervous system can't take it. It puts us in a startle pattern. I don't even like even bringing up, a school shooting, because it breaks my heart when I think of that, you see. But the problem with it is that we get barraged by this, and then we get worn down by it. And then, unless we have tools to release out of that patterning, we become a sponge to the negativity. And so what I'm teaching all my students, I say, okay, so you're going to watch the news. I don't want you to stick your head in the sand and be an ostrich. I want you to be aware of what's going on in the world, but be mindful of your reactive state. Because if you internalize it, it's not good for you. You have to have empathy without some type of internal program of excessive tension. Mm-hmm. Empathetic, understanding, communicate, listen, but don't do something that's going to be harmful to you.
Mm. Yeah, I believe that one of the reasons we're overwhelmed is, well, we used to just have information that was to our local village or community, and now we get information from all over the world, and our nervous system gets overwhelmed, and we go into fight or flight because it's exhausting. You get to digest all of that, and it takes a lot of energy.
Oh, sure it does. And if we get too much negativity, we start armoring ourselves up so we can't quite feel it anymore. I mean, I reflect back when I was a little boy, my father's mother and dad, my grandparents, lived in a small town in southern Illinois called Mount Airy. It had, if you can believe it, a gravel main street and wooden sidewalks. It was from another time. Mm-hmm. But there was such a sense of community. There was a white clapboard Methodist church that my grandmother taught Sunday school at. You had a one-room post office, and in front of the post office were all these seats, and you had veterans from World War I, which was my grandfather's generation, sitting there, and they would all just talk and be together. If you went into a store, they knew you by your first name, mm-hmm. Or, maybe they didn't know me, but they knew I was Dave Frederick's kid who mm-hmm. had grown up there, but now lived in northern Illinois. You see, there was a sense of being seen and heard and recognized. But that gets lost today, and it's actually quite sad. It's one of the things about the workshop in Malibu is we have a real sense of community. People come back year after year because there's that feeling of the collective, of coming together, of single focus that is very, very
a resonance.
Yeah, it's just healthy.
Yeah, a resonance to something healthy.
Yeah, and you get people, I mean, the work that you do and the work that I'm interested in is really transformational. We're interested in approaches to transformation. Feldenkrais method is a transformational approach. So is the Alexander technique, and obviously yoga. Mm-hmm. You see, these are things that interest us. And if you get people together with similar interests that are different but complementary, it's so rich.
Yeah.
It's just fun. It's just fun.
Happens.
Right.
Yeah. When I see the work you do with all the different methods you're attracted to, and what I'm doing and so many other people, is liberating consciousness. Like, consciousness is already liberated and it's already evolved. It's not evolving. It's the forms through which it gets expressed that are evolving. And So when I'm working with someone or my own body, I'm trying to give consciousness more bandwidth through this
Sure.
instrument.
Yeah.
So by whatever means, it could be just simply changing my perspective and a total change in mood and freedom in movement can happen just through changing the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'll
so
get, if I may, I'll give an example of one of my mentors.
yeah.
Um, there was a great British writer named Aldous Huxley. He wrote
Uh-huh.
Brave New World and a lot of major books. And he actually knew F.M. Alexander and had Alexander lessons. And his wife, Laura Huxley, I knew very, very well. She lived in LA, in Hollywood on Mulholland Drive, right below the Hollywood sign. And in 1984, she called me up, and I picked up the phone, and she said, "Are you Michael Frederick?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you an Alexander teacher and a Feldenkrais practitioner?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Well, my name's Laura Huxley. I'd like to study with you." Well, for a quarter of a century, 25 years, we were vast friends. I used to go down almost every week and stay at her house because I didn't want to drive back and forth from Ojai with all the traffic. Plus, she was just a wonderful human being. And she had this ability that when she talked to you, you felt like she wasn't talking to anyone else. It was just you. And she knew everyone. She knew Moshe Feldenkrais. He was a friend. She had studied the Alexander technique. She had worked in Hollywood on script writing and things like that. But she also wrote an amazing book that I think you would like. It's called This Timeless Moment. And it's about Aldous Huxley at the end of his life and her with him.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes we meet people who, when you're with them, things melt away. Your anxiety just isn't quite there anymore. Um, you know, a little bit of fresh air comes in through the window, as it were. You know, a smile comes back to your face after you've had a hard day. And she was like that, you know. And the thing about the Alexander technique, it enables you to treat yourself well. If you don't have someone like Laura in your life or a grandmother like I had who loved me unconditionally, and you can love yourself. I mean, I don't, you know, it's so important to like yourself. You see, and the idea of giving yourself space and learning. You know, don't get critical with yourself. I know I'm not, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir talking to you, but maybe someone hearing this maybe it'll speak to them. I was so self-critical when I was young, and I had to learn to let go of that. You see, especially self-critical. I wanted to be an actor. I went off to a great theater school in England called the Bristol Old Vic in Bristol, England. It's where Daniel Day-Lewis trained to be an actor. I was there a few years before him. And the thing that was really hard was to let go of my self-judgment around acting. At that time, I didn't have anyone to help me with that. So, you know, I'm using the acting example, but it could be anything. You could be a cook wanting to learn to really be a great chef, and it's still that criticism comes in. You know, so the thing about being kind to yourself is so important. Give yourself mental, emotional space.
Yeah.
And
Well, I like how kind you've been to yourself as a triple Scorpio to these wonderful teachers, and just I think I feel like you know, nature is always trying to find balance, right? So if we come in with any kind of extreme, we're naturally attractive to the opposite, like yin and yang, right? Because nature is seeking to balance and harmonize. So when there are people who come in that are pretty balanced, and they don't tend to be seekers because they don't
Right.
have that
I think
extreme
that's right.
balance.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel like because of your triple Scorpio water element, emotional depth and intensity, you were able to attract and find something to stabilize that, to help you use that as a tool to navigate
Right.
your life and experiences. And now that you've done that and integrated it, you're passing it on and sharing it with others. And not through having read it out of a book, although I'm sure you've read all the books on the shelf behind you. You're embodying it, and you
Right.
can't really teach and share something you haven't embodied that's going
Right.
to stick for someone else. So I feel your dedication to this and your lifelong journey is something you carry in your field, just like Mrs. Huxley, right? It's like
Right. No,
when
absolutely.
we're with someone, it's the field of energy that they're anchoring here on this planet that is having an impact in the lives of
Right.
others. And I feel like our gift to the world is to create a beautiful field where people can rest in our presence, and that
Oh
has.
yeah, no, no, I agree. I mean, when you talk about that, it reminds me of uh, a poem from Rumi. Uh, Out beyond right doing and wrong doing is a field.
Mhm,
I'll meet you there.
right.
You see? And you can take that field in many ways. It can be literally a field of grass, or it could be an energy field. You see, it all works.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more, and no joking aside or anything, I mean, it's all about paying it back.
Uh-huh.
I've been, one area that I've been extremely fortunate in my life is I've had just more than my share of wonderful mentors. And the truth is, I didn't look for them,
Mm.
they appeared. The connecting link was my grandmother. My grandmother on my dad's side loved me unconditionally. She's been dead since 1966, but I still remember her reaching her hands out towards me, you know. And my whole life, that has linked me up because what happens is I don't know how it works. Even talking about it is odd,
Mhm.
but it's almost as if she's my North Star. It's that if you talk about energy, it's not like she's standing next to me necessarily. What it is there's something that keeps you on the straight path.
Mhm.
And then you make stupid mistakes, or you make things happen to you, or you don't know how to deal with it, and your back's up against the wall. And then all of a sudden, some mentor shows up and gives you a little kick in the tush for the next step, you see. And I just feel blessed. But I've learned now, in my late 70s, it's absolutely essential to give it all away. You see, you can't hold on to anything. Um, so that's one of the things about this course in Malibu. It's just an opportunity to give it away. You see, for people to come and learn and and hopefully gain some skill to make their life a little easier.
Yeah. I love the Franciscan energy too. I taught yoga to some Benedictine and Franciscan nuns
Right.
when I lived in Minnesota, and those Franciscans were such givers, just
Oh,
so
right.
nurturing. I never felt more loved than going to the farm and being fed, and in the retreats, just everything. I was just so cared for.
May I just ask briefly what part of Minnesota?
Well, started in Grand Rapids and then ended up in St. Cloud,
Sure.
Cold Spring area. Yeah.
I know Minnesota well. I lived in Minneapolis,
Mm.
and it had a really positive effect. It's a great state.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Goleta, and then I got moved when I was 11. I was born in 66.
Ah, yeah, I remember 66.
Yeah.
They tried to
No.
draft me for Vietnam in
Oh,
1966.
no.
It was a scary time, let me tell you. You felt like you were just a piece of meat and they wanted to ship you off to Southeast Asia.
Oh.
It was scary.
I want to go back and say, this thing about your grandmother and this feeling of wanting to give back and so generous and nurturing, I sense coming from you, is just like we talked about before, where there's these sort of genetic weaknesses in the lineage that get passed on and that we have to be mindful of not
Right.
continuing. There's also the benevolent things that get passed on,
That's right.
not
I mean,
overlook that,
yeah, thank you, grandmother. So no, that is exactly correct. It's so easy to look at the glass as half empty and, woe is me. I inherited this or I inherited that trait. But the
Mhm.
truth is, there's also so good things.
Yeah,
One always has to look at the full picture.
yeah.
The thing I did want to say, about Malibu is that there was going to be a mammoth discount for any of your people,
Hmm.
something that Michael Gelb talked about. So it's a lot. I think it was like $600 off the base price.
It's really generous.
Yeah, well, I think you have to do it, especially now we're coming out of COVID, out of the pandemic. I know numbers are up, but there's enough people with shots that hopefully the outcome is less severe.
So this is your first one live since
Yeah,
COVID?
this is the first one after 2 years.
Hmm.
We did it on Zoom.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is coming back in person in Malibu. Everyone needs to be vaccinated, and we're going to be very mindful. But we really want to get back in person for all the obvious reasons, and then just heading towards into the future.
Hmm.
And I just was at an Alexander International Congress in Berlin this past August. We had about 550 Alexander teachers and trainees there.
Wow.
And there were, COVID wasn't an issue. So, people, I don't know how to put it. If you're smart, you deal with, if you can, um, how to put it. I've had every shot in the book, plus I had my flu shot. And so, not that I'm hiding behind that, but it just seems that I'm careful, but I'm not afraid, might be a way of putting it, you
Mm-hmm.
see. So, you know, hopefully the whole world works through this and learns a big, big lesson. And it's such a tragedy, so many people have died.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Mm.
And, one of my students is a very successful screenwriter. His name's Derek, and he wrote the movie The Deer Hunter, which
Mhm.
is an Oscar-winning film with Robert De Niro and a lot of other Meryl Streep and A-list actors. And he came for a lesson, and he's probably in his mid-80s now. He came in and he was right here in this room looking out the window onto a garden. And he just was reflecting. He said, Michael, life is loss. And I heard that, and my first reaction was that was a downer statement, a negative statement. But then I reflected on it, I realized it wasn't at all. That it's actually a reality statement. That
Mhm.
the older you get, things happen.
Mhm.
People, loved ones die, or jobs are lost. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen, but it's how you deal with it that's really important. How you deal with it. And I'm sure and I'm sure people that listen to this know people who have a special quality that if if something happens that's a tragedy, or deep sadness, they know how to listen. They know how to empathize. They know how to reach out to you. And they can't fix you. That doesn't work. But what they can do is they can, in a kindness, a deep kindness, meet you. And out of that deep kindness, something shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of, how it, I mean, that's what I'm learning right now. So,
Yeah, it reminds me of a spiritual teacher, Adi Ashanti. You're familiar
Mhm.
with him? Yeah. He said, enlightenment is a destructive process.
Wow, that's really good. Well, I'm gonna,
So it's
that's
about
a good one.
allowing what's not real to fall
Yeah,
away. Yeah.
yeah,
And that essence
enlightenment.
remains.
That's exactly right. I mean, enlightenment is a destruct. Yeah. What it really is a letting go. It's like, oh, letting go. Not this, not that. You see. Doesn't mean one's cold. It doesn't mean one has a shield up. It means one is open, vulnerable, and there's a release and letting go.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know we were going to get on this topic talking today. So
It
here we
happens.
are.
It happens. Is there any, as we wrap up our conversation, is there any one surprising success story you've heard based on applying these methods, like some practical examples of how people have been helped by this that stand out for you?
Well, about the Feldenkrais work and Alexander technique, the answer is when I trained with Moshe Feldenkrais, there was I think he was a violinist from Israel, probably in the symphony there, that had been in a terrorist attack, shot up pretty badly. And Feldenkrais basically was able to rewire him so that he could go back playing music. I mean, that just astounded me when I heard that story, you see. With the Alexander technique, because that's what I primarily teach, so many stories of, well, it happened to me the other day. I was here in Ojai and I went down to a market here called Westbridge, and I've got my Ojai clothes on and I'm sort of just shopping and all this. And all of a sudden there's this attractive woman that walks by me and then she turns and looks at me and she says, Michael? You're Michael Frederick? And I said, yes. I was your student over 15 years ago, 15 years. You changed my life. I was blown away.
Mm.
I mean, and then once she introduced herself, I mean, in 15 plus years, I've had a lot of students, but of course, it all starts to filter back.
Mm-hmm.
And I was incredibly touched by that.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I think of you all the time. She said, I now moved to Ojai and I've got my kids here and they're going to school. And I'm going through a divorce. It's a tough time, but I have a new relationship and it's just marvelous. And I just listened to her. She just sort of sat there and stood there and talked and shared everything. So that happens. You never know when you teach how you might have affected someone in a positive way
Uh-huh.
until you stumble onto a situation like that. So I was humbled by that. Because sometimes you teach and you just wonder, I'm making a change, you see. And then something like that happens, you are,
Uh-huh.
you see. And so anyway, that's an example.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Are you teaching classes now? And
Yeah, I teach in Ojai and in Santa Barbara and in Los Angeles and Santa Monica.
Mhm.
I've been doing that for years. So I teach privately, individual lessons, and I also teach group classes. And specifically, to performers in LA.
Mhm.
But I have to stress the work isn't just for performers, it's for anything. But I like working with actors because that was my background and training.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's what I do. I've been earning my living going on almost, I don't know, 45, 47 years,
Mm.
pushing towards the 50 mark.
Wow.
And and then we have these workshops. We do this one in December 27th to January 1st in Malibu. And then in the summer and in the first week of July, we are in Tuscany, Italy. You see, I
Wow.
love I love going to Italy. I mean, it's just so when I go there, we teach. We rent a villa, and people live there and eat there and study. We all do the same. It's the same model as we do in Malibu.
Yeah.
You can live there, eat there, and you have it's a week long. It is always a 6 day affair. You have a half day at the beginning where people come and register. That's the 27th of December. And then we have evening classes. And then we have 4 full days, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st. And then we celebrate New Year's on the evening of the 31st. And then we finish on the 1st with lunch, classes in the morning and lunch. And it's a great way to start your year.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many people do you take for that?
How many people?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
that.
we usually have around 30, but
Hmm.
because we've dropped off for 2 years, it's going to be smaller this year,
Hmm.
in the area of 20, 15 to 20. But
Hmm.
it'll pick up next year.
Hmm.
So I just, I've always trusted that the work works
Yeah.
and I've already told some of the people who have come there many times it's going to be smaller, and they say, "Oh, great, we're going to, because they're going to get more work and
Ah,
more lessons." So it's a win-win for all, actually.
yeah.
But if I could, people can find out information if they go to Alexander Technique Retreats with
Oh,
an S,
yeah.
retreatswithanas.com. They can find it. There's my phone numbers there. People can call me.
I'll put that in the description of the video. So people
Please, yeah.
find you. When I had an Alexander session with a man named Anthony Taylor. He was um, also from England, and his wife as well, Chloe, was trained.
Uh-huh.
Also, when I was teaching the nuns yoga at St. Benedict's Monastery, there was a woman, a sister named Mary. I don't remember her last name, but she was a Feldenkrais
Uh-huh.
practitioner, and
Right.
she was such a mystic. Just
Right. I mean, you meet one of the things I like about the communities, both the Feldenkrais world and the Alexander Technique world, is you meet wonderful people.
yeah.
Because there are people who are interested in learning how to work on themselves. And, basically, both modalities teach you how to create a space between the stimulus and the response, that space between. And I call that the still point.
Hmm.
You create, it doesn't mean you don't have strong likes and dislikes, you're just not controlled by it, you see. You know, you can say, well, I like this and I don't like that. That's absolutely legitimate. But if you get caught up in it, that's the problem. You've got to have a certain space. I think of great leaders like Nelson Mandela,
Mm.
who seemed to have worked through in his life when he was in prison freedom from the duality of like and dislike. You know, I guess, from what I've read and heard, he had transformed so much that even his jailers loved him. You
Yeah.
see, and there was something remarkable about him. Now, of course, he had passion. Of course, you know, and my second wife was from Johannesburg, so I had a bit of experience going down to South Africa. But you meet people like that, people who, in the crunch of a situation, know how they've learned how not to get caught up in what I call the opposites.
Yeah, yeah, the polarity. It feels like they're guided by something
Hmm.
is beyond the primal instinct, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think that's the human work. I mean, a human being is to work towards that. You see, we all have the ability.
yeah. You know,
So,
Jill Bolt Taylor, who also has a famous TED Talk,
huh?
The Stroke of Insight. Remember, she had a stroke, and
Right. No, I remember, and she worked on herself and completely.
yeah, she wrote a book recently called Whole Brain Living, and I really appreciate her perspective. She
Right.
talks about the lower part of the brain, the amygdala, and then
No,
the
that's where the fight or flight is there. Right.
right. But she says we don't have one amygdala, we have a left and a right, and they
Right.
operate differently. And the same here. And so she
Here.
talks
Right.
about getting the four characters of the brain to have a brain huddle.
I love it.
So
And the thing, it's undoubtedly our birthright when you think about it. When you think of children who've been raised and there's a playfulness still in their eyes as they start to get into teenage years, there's a different quality. There's sometimes, it's, I don't want to blame too much our educational system, but it doesn't really help us much to integrate our whole selves. But right now, a lot of people understand this, and there's different ways of learning. And
yeah,
then you've always had people like Maria Montessori, and in her schools, and J. Krishnamurti in his schools, and you know Rudolf Steiner and
yeah,
the Steiner work. Sure.
yeah. And more I think are emerging.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, we've gone on for a while. I've
We have.
really
Well, I'm
enjoyed
sure we
this.
could go on. We didn't even touch on Sufism and
Oh, darn.
studying in Konya, Turkey, but I'd like to do that another time.
Okay, we'll do it another time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael, for
Oh,
sharing
my
your wisdom.
pleasure. It's a joy to talk to you. You're very easy to
Yeah,
talk to and have a nice flow, and
I hope.
I
I hope.
greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you
Bye
everyone
bye.
for
Yeah.
listening in. I hope this was helpful, and there's more information in the description to connect with Michael and his great work. Oh, bye for now.
Bye bye.